Hey guys, tonight we're standing in the drifting mist of ancient northern China. You can almost taste the damp earth under your tongue. That faint clay dust smell that clings to your teeth and refuses to leave. The air is cool, restless, and carries the lonely cry of a crane somewhere far off across a marshy plain. You're not wearing Gore-Tex or anything fancy. It's scratchy hemp on your back, rough straw sandals on your feet, and the occasional squelch of mud creeping between your toes as you trudge forward. You probably won't survive this if you're squeamish about sore feet and grain-only diets. But luckily you don't actually have to. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're tuning in live, or even catching this late at night, go ahead and drop a comment with your location and the local time. I always love knowing just how many time zones this sleepy little community manages to span. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin in the Warring States period, centuries before anyone thought of the wall as a single great thing. It's not a dragon stretching over mountains yet. Instead, it's dozens of scratchy, sun-baked barricades of packed dirt, slapped together by competing kingdoms, too paranoid to share neighbors. Every lord seems to have the same idea. Pile up earth, stamp it flat with wooden rammers, and hope the next cavalry charge gets stuck ankle-deep before it skewers your village. It's defensive DIY on a grand scale. The Chu, Qi, Yan, and especially the northern states, like Shao and Yan, all experiment with these earthen ramparts. The soil is tamped layer after layer, a process called hangtu, meaning rammed earth. You picture men with mallets, pounding rhythmically, as though they're drumming their stress out on the planet itself. Historians still argue whether these early walls actually slowed raids, or just provided moral comfort to rulers desperate to look busy. You suspect a little of both after all. A fence doesn't stop determined neighbors, but it sure makes you feel like you tried. The smell of damp clay mixes with smoke from cooking fires. Soldiers, well, they're technically farmers, pressed into part-time soldiering chew on hardened cakes of millet. The taste, bland as drywall dust, with a crunch like gravel. They build by day, guard by night, and try not to think about the horse hooves that echo across the plains. Quirky detail. Some rulers even ordered thorny bushes planted along these walls, hoping raiders would stop to untangle themselves like sheep in a hedge. Not exactly foolproof, but creative. You shuffle along the wall's crest, if it can be called that. It's barely shoulder high in places, eroded by rain and wind, yet it snakes over hills in patches like scars across the landscape. Down below, farmers till the earth as if nothing's wrong, their oxen pulling wooden plows that squeak and groan like tired violins. Imagine working your field while also knowing a mounted raid could sweep in at any moment. Anxiety, but with chores. The walls grow not from grand vision, but from constant nagging fear. Nomadic tribes, often lumped together under names like Hu or Rong, test these defenses. Some ride past laughing, others raid granaries, and a few even settle near border posts, trading sheep for grain with the very people they were supposed to terrorize. That blurred line between enemy and neighbor, it's been there since the beginning. You lean against the earthen wall, watching a trade of sheep wool for iron tools, both sides pretending they aren't supposed to be enemies. At night, torches flicker, the wall casts long shadows in the moonlight, and you hear the restless cough of a guard trying to stay awake. He probably misses his family in the valley. He probably also knows that if he dozes, some wandering official might show up with a rod. Humor glimmers here, people carved jokes into the packed earth, crude stick figures, names of sweethearts, even exaggerated horses that look more like giant ducks. Archaeologists have actually found graffiti in some ancient sites, proof that even in the serious business of defense, humans still doodled when bored. The mist rolls heavier, and you think about how these early stretches, built separately, will one day be stitched together. But right now, they're more like awkward family cousins, similar in function, not really on speaking terms. Each state sees the wall as theirs alone, a proud mark of sovereignty. Nobody's imagining the Great Wall yet. It's just our wall and their wall, with plenty of suspicion between. The earth tastes metallic when the wind picks up and throws grit into your mouth. You spit, wipe your face, and press on. Some villagers set up markets right outside the walls, selling salted fish, cheap pottery, or charms against arrows. A child tugs your sleeve, trying to hawk a carved clay tiger meant to keep ghosts away. You take it, smile, and tuck it into your robe. Why not? Ghost insurance feels practical out here. Mainstream. History tells you that the first significant linking and expansion won't happen until Qin Shi Huang's reign. But the bones of the idea are here, fragmented, insecure, dusty bones. The quirky thorn fences and graffiti prove people were as restless then as now. And historians still debate whether these walls truly marked the edge of China at the time, or if that's a later romantic rewrite. For now, they're just lumpy scars across muddy hills, and you're just one more set of tired feet shuffling along them, half curious, half drowsy, and very aware that the mist hides more than it reveals. You keep trudging along, your sandals now coated with dried clumps of reddish earth, when a new sound breaks through the night, mist hammer on stone, voices chanting in rhythm, and the shuffle of thousands of feet. You've stumbled into the age of Qin Shi Huang, the so-called first emperor, who unified the patchwork states into something resembling a single empire. And of course, what better way to celebrate total domination than to build one really, really long wall? You can almost hear him saying, "If each of you had your own wall, now you'll have mine." The man was obsessed with permanence. He standardized coins, writing even the width of cart axles so they'd fit neatly in the ruts of government roads. And when it came to defense, his logic was simple: link those scattered state walls into one big, brooding line. The project was colossal. Tens of thousands of conscripts, farmers, convicts, soldiers unlucky enough to mouth off, were sent north to ram earth and stack stones. You feel the ground shake under their synchronized pounding as wooden rammers smack clay into compressed slabs. It's monotonous work, but the chanting keeps everyone moving. Like an ancient construction playlist with only one song. You pause at a half-finished stretch. Men bent double-haul wicker baskets of soil on their shoulders, sweat soaking through rough hemp tunics. The taste of dust coats your throat, the kind that makes you cough even though you're not really there. Supervisors walk with rods in hand, not hesitating to motivate anyone who lags. You joke quietly to yourself. No Employee of the Month awards here, just employee who doesn't collapse. And collapse, they do. Death tolls run high, so much so that later legends claim the wall is mortared with human bones. Historians still argue whether that's literal truth or poetic exaggeration. But the fact remains, workers died by the thousands, bodies were often buried nearby, their ghosts, people whispered, forever trapped in the wall itself. That old clay tiger charm in your robe suddenly feels more necessary. Qin Shi Huang himself. You never see him sweating out here. He rides in a chariot, clad in armor, surrounded by banners. His paranoia is legendary. This is the same guy who sent expeditions hunting for immortality, potions, and buried an entire terracotta army to guard him in the afterlife. If anyone would build a wall that seemed endless, it was him. Still, historians debate whether he intended the wall as one seamless defense, or simply a quick fix link of what already existed. You imagine him saying, just connect the dots. How hard can it be? As if drawing on a map equaled reality, beacon towers rise higher now, unlike the stubby mounds of earlier centuries. Fires at night send signals racing from one end of the horizon to the other. You stand beside a pile of firewood, watching a soldier carefully stack kindling. He tells you that one blaze means raiders nearby, 2 blazes mean cavalry, and 3 mean run. And maybe write a farewell note first. The system is clever, but you notice how lonely the soldier's post feels. 1 man, 1 fire, and an awful lot of silence between. Meals are still miserable. Millet gruel, maybe a pickle if you're lucky, but there's also rice wine, thin and sour, which the guards drink like it's gourmet champagne. A fringe tidbit: archaeologists have found ancient cooking pits along chin wall sites, some with charred animal bones that suggest workers occasionally hunted rabbits or even snakes when rations ran low. Imagine the campfire banter. More snake soup tonight. Great tastes, just like snake. At dusk, the sky burns red. The new wall slices across valleys and ridges like a scar carved by giant hands. From high above, it would look impressive already, though not nearly as massive as later brick and stone versions. Still, for a kingdom just stitched together from rivals, it's a bold statement. We are one, and this wall proves it. You run your palm over the surface. The tamped earth is surprisingly solid, warm under the setting sun. Rough like sandpaper, but steady beneath your touch. And yet, the irony is hard to ignore. For all the effort, nomadic horsemen still find gaps. Cavalry can ride around certain stretches, and the sheer length makes manning it all nearly impossible. Scholars debate whether Qin's war actually worked militarily or was more about psychological theater. You stand on the ridge, watching dust clouds form beyond the horizon, imagining mounted riders circling like sharks, testing the seams. The wall is less fortress, more billboard, warning empire at work. You cough again, brushing grit from your eyes. One worker beside you mutters a joke through cracked lips. The emperor seeks immortality, but this wall is what kills us. You laugh quietly, though it catches in your throat, because the man is right. For the people conscripted here, the Great Wall isn't some wonder of the world. It's just back-breaking shifts to little food and endless pounding of earth. And yet, step back in your mind, and you see it forming a jagged ribbon crawling across the mountains, linking kingdoms, whispering of ambition greater than any one dynasty. Your sandals crunch over gravel now, and the earth beneath your feet feels firmer, older, almost like the weight of time itself has pressed it down. The mist thins, replaced by desert wind that stings your cheeks and coats your lips with the taste of salt and dust. You've marched into the Han Dynasty, and here the wall takes on a new life, not just as a barrier, but as a nervous spine stretching alongside the young empire's ambitions. The Han emperors have something the Qin did not, an empire that must breathe outward, all the way into the deserts of the north and west. You stumble along the frontier routes, where traders' caravans clink with bronze bells. Horses snort, camels groan, and the scent of dried apricots, spices, and sweaty leather mixes in the air. This is the beginning of the Silk Road, and the wall marches with it like a stern older sibling, always hovering close by. You pause at a garrison post. The walls here are taller, thicker, less ragged than those of the warring states, though still largely rammed earth. Soldiers sit sharpening bronze blades, their eyes darting toward the steppe. They talk about the Zhongnu, fierce confederations of nomads, whose cavalry raids have battered the frontier for generations. Mainstream fact: Emperor Wu of Han pushed campaigns northward, spending vast sums of money and lives to secure the borders. You can almost hear the sigh of an accountant back in the capital, tallying the impossible costs, while generals shout for more horses. Meals here aren't much better than before. Millet cakes, salty pickles, maybe a dried fish dragged up from a market town. But quirky detail records mention that some soldiers planted mulberry trees near garrisons. Not for shade, but for silkworms. Picture it: a soldier by day, amateur silk farmer by night, hoping the worms spin enough to trade for something tastier than gruel. The frontier winds never stop. Sand drifts against the wall's base, piling like frozen waves. You wrap your robe tighter and shuffle past a beacon tower where two men argue about who forgot to clean the signal braziers. The smell of last night's smoke clings to the stones. They laugh eventually, teasing each other about how even if the Zhongnu come, the smoke will probably blow the wrong direction anyway. Humor survives everywhere, even in places where arrows often sing. You look outward, toward the endless grasslands, and it hits you. The wall isn't a sealed boundary, not really. Trade flows through gates, envoys cross back and forth, and some Zhongnu leaders even marry into Chinese families. Historians still argue whether the wall was more about keeping enemies out or managing contact in controlled doses. You think of it as an ancient version of a nightclub bouncer, sometimes barring the rowdy, sometimes letting in whoever looks profitable. Your footsteps bring you to a dusty fort, where the wall bends like a tired elbow. Inside, you smell horse sweat and damp leather. Riders prepared to patrol, their saddles creaking as they mount up. The clatter of hooves echoes against the wall, fading into the desert beyond. You imagine being one of them, trotting out into vast emptiness, with nothing but horizon ahead and the occasional flutter of a hawk's shadow. Not terrifying exactly, Jess. Lonely in a way that seeps into your bones. Scholars debate the effectiveness of Han walls, especially this far out. Some argue they allowed caravans and settlements to blossom safely, while others insist the empire bled resources to maintain lines too long to defend. Standing here, the debate feels real. Behind you, farmers and traders barter, life buzzing with energy. Ahead of you, the steppe waits, silent and unbroken. You lick your lips, tasting dust again, and wonder if anyone ever really felt safe here. Night falls quickly in the desert. The wall glows faintly under moonlight, a pale ribbon cutting across black dunes. Fires burn in watchtowers, smoke drifting like lazy ghosts into the sky. A soldier next to you mutters a joke. At least the wall keeps the wind out of my soup. You chuckle thin comfort, but maybe that's all you need at the edge of the world. You wake to the sharp snap of wood in the distance, the dry crack of twigs catching fire. It takes a moment for your ears to sort the sound out, but then you realize it's the signal towers. Somewhere far to the west, flames leap skyward, and within minutes, another tower farther along the horizon answers back, its smoke curling into the early morning haze. You've reached the era where watchtowers and beacon smoke turn the wall into more than just packed earth. Now it's a nervous system, flashing messages like sparks racing through nerves, carrying warnings from one edge of the empire to the other. The tower you approach looms taller than the walls themselves, square and stubborn, with wooden platforms jutting like ribs. Soldiers lounge at the base, dice clattering on a flat rock. The smell of smoke clings to their clothes, not just from last night's fire but from years of lighting signal blazes in the wind. You climb the creaking ladder, hands gripping rough wood, and the air grows sharper as you rise. From the top, the world stretches forever, rolling hills behind, infinite grasslands ahead. No wonder emperors invested in these towers. They made you feel like you could almost see tomorrow itself coming by day. Signals meant billowing smoke, wolf dung mixed with hay for extra thickness. The smell pungent and sharp, making your eyes sting. By night, bright flames cut through the darkness. Quirky tidbit: some outposts experimented with mixing oils into the fire to change smoke colors, hoping to send more complex messages than help. Raiders incoming. Historians still argue whether those experiments ever worked, or if the whole colored smoke code is just an over-romantic exaggeration. Either way, you picture a soldier tossing herbs into a blaze and muttering, "Maybe green smoke means we're out of beer." The men stationed here are a mix of weary garrison troops and unlucky peasants. They look out over the steppe, half bored, half terrified. You join them for their meal. Millet, gruel again, of course, but spiced tonight with a pinch of wild onions gathered nearby. It tastes sharp, almost sweet, and the hot steam fills your nose. Someone cracks a joke about the onions keeping both raiders and ghosts away. You laugh, though the wind swallows the sound quickly as you sit. One man gestures toward the horizon, telling you about wolves, not just the four-legged kind, but the wolves on horseback, who sweep in faster than smoke can rise. He's not wrong. Sometimes the signal comes too late. The riders already inside villages by the time a blaze reaches the capital. Still, there's comfort in the ritual. Light the fire, send the smoke, and believe that somewhere, someone sees you. The tower itself feels alive at night. Flames crackle, shadows sway against the rammed earth walls, and you feel the warmth on your face, even as the wind claws at your back. The soldiers keep watch in shifts, their eyes red from smoke, their voices low and gravelly from shouting over the gale. One hums a tune, steady and slow, and you recognize it as the kind of song meant to keep fear at bay. Mainstream fact: these towers dotted the frontier at regular intervals, designed so that no post was too far from the next for a signal to leap. The network could, in theory, relay warnings hundreds of miles in a single day. Whether messages always got interpreted correctly, that's another debate. Historians still argue if a distant emperor really knew whether a fire meant 200 raiders or my neighbor borrowed my goat again. From above, you watch a patrol return. Horses pant, their flanks shiny with sweat. The riders dismount stiffly, muttering curses about sandstorms and phantom raiders that turned out to be nothing but dust clouds. They tie their horses to posts near the wall, the animals stamping, snorting, impatient for grain. The men themselves slump by the fire, swapping tales of ghostly armies seen in the dunes. One claims he saw a figure walking on top of the wall at night, taller than any man, glowing pale. The others laugh nervously, but you notice none of them volunteer for the next midnight watch alone. The beacon towers give the wall a pulse. Without them, it's just dirt and stone. With them, it's alive, whispering in smoke and flame. You lean on the rough wood railing, your eyes watering as fresh smoke spirals upward, and you can't help but think, this wall isn't just about keeping enemies out, it's about making the lonely feel connected, even across impossible distances. And as the night deepens, with fires dancing along the horizon like winking stars, you find yourself breathing slower, soothed by the rhythm of light leaping from tower to tower, a chain of reassurance stretching into the darkness. The smoke from the beacon towers fades behind you as you wander into a quieter stretch of wall, where the clamor of armies gives way to the shuffle of daily life. Here, soldiers and farmers live side by side, not because anyone planned it that way, but because history rarely asks permission. The wall is more than a fortress. It's a neighborhood, albeit one where your neighbor's rooster might be louder than the war drums. You follow the scent of porridge, thick with millet and just a hint of wild greens. A farmer stirs it in an iron pot, blackened by years of use, while a soldier hovers nearby, bowl in hand, clearly hoping to sneak an extra ladle. The farmer chuckles, mutters about feeding the empire's protectors, and you can't help but notice the quiet bargain of frontier life. The soldier guards, the farmer feeds, and both complain equally about their lot. The porridge steams in your hand, bland but warm, filling your belly as wind rattles the wooden shutters. Quirky tidbit: in some garrisons, soldiers were actually encouraged to farm during downtime, growing beans or tending pigs right beside their posts. You picture a guard leaning on his spear while scattering feed to chickens, half warrior, half farmer, all exhausted. Historians still argue whether this practice kept soldiers loyal or just distracted them from actual defense. You suspect both. It's hard to raid-proof your wall when you're chasing a runaway goat. Children play along the packed earth slopes, their sandals kicking up dust, their laughter carried by the wind. They weave red dolls, some shaped like soldiers, with painted-on helmets. One boy insists his doll can fight off 10 nomads single-handedly. The others laugh, tossing straw hats like frisbees. Life here is precarious, yet still colored by ordinary joys. You sip more porridge, watching the smoke of cooking fires mingle with the faint scent of horse sweat drifting from the nearby stables. The soldiers themselves seem both hardened and weary. Their armor is dented, their belts frayed, but their eyes brighten when talk turns to home. One man tells you about a daughter learning to read in a far-off village. Another dreams of opening a tavern if he survives another campaign. They sit around a fire, roasting a rabbit someone snared, joking that it's the most meat they've seen in weeks. One quips, "If the emperor ever visits, he can share my bedroll assuming he doesn't mind fleas." The others laugh, and you can't help but smile. Humor is a shield here, as vital as the wall itself. At dusk, the garrison and the farmers gather together. Bowls of thin wine are passed around, bitter and sour, but warming all the same. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and the faint sweetness of roasted chestnuts. A farmer strums a lute, its strings slightly out of tune, while voices rise in a song that drifts across the wall like a lullaby. You hum along, your eyes tracing the horizon, where shadows lengthen and blend into night. Mainstream fact: the Han Dynasty established Tuncheon colonies, military farming settlements, along the frontier, combining defense with agriculture. They weren't glamorous, but they anchored the empire's reach. Still, historians debate whether these colonies strengthened control or simply bled manpower from the core. Looking around, you see both truths: walls guarded, fields tended, yet lives stretched thin. Later, as stars prick the sky, you wander into the barracks. It's a cramped room of rough wood beams and straw mats. The smell of damp wool and smoke clings everywhere. A soldier snores loudly, while another rolls dice in the corner, trying not to wake him. You lie down on a straw mat, itchy but warm, and the steady rhythm of breathing round you feels almost like the wall itself is exhaling. You think back to the boy with the reed doll, to the farmer's porridge, to the soldier's half-joking dream of running a tavern. This section of wall is less about grand emperors and endless bricks, and more about these lives braided together. Here, you realize, the wall doesn't just keep enemies out, it keeps families in, keeps hope alive, keeps the fragile fabric of daily survival stitched together under the shadow of something massive. The porridge smell drifts away as you wander farther along the wall, and soon the air turns sharper, colder, carrying the metallic temps of horse sweat. The frontier stretches out before you, endless grasslands, shimmering under the sun like a sea of green and gold. You squint into the distance, where shadows move, sometimes just herds of wild animals, sometimes something else entirely. This is the uneasy zone where farmers and soldiers end, and the Zhongnu nomads begin. Here, the line between us and them is as blurry as the heat haze that dances above the plains. You step down from the wall and follow a narrow trail, leading toward a makeshift market outside a gate. A handful of tents sag in the wind. The smell of roasted mutton mixes with the dry musk of horsehide. Traders shout in a jumble of dialects, bartering sheep for grain, bronze for furs. A farmer hands over a sack of millet, while a rider in felt boots tosses back a bundle of wool. The transaction is quick, efficient, almost routine. You realize that the same wall built to divide also funnels contact, turning enemies into trading partners when it suits everyone's stomachs. Mainstream fact: the Zhongnu Confederation was powerful enough to demand tribute from the Han court. Emperors sometimes offered silk, grain, even princesses in marriage alliances, hoping to buy peace. Quirky tidbit: some Zhongnu leaders loved Chinese wine so much they'd trade entire herds for barrels of the sour stuff, only to complain later that it made their horses lazy. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were clever diplomacy or humiliating concessions. You watch a rider laugh as he gulps wine from a clay jug, and you think probably both. As evening falls, you sit by a campfire just beyond the wall. Soldiers and nomads share roasted lamb skewers, the fat sizzling, the smell rich and heavy. You bite into one, the meat smoky and tender, a welcome change from millet gruel. The soldiers glance nervously toward their officers, who pretend not to see the mingling. Out here, survival trumps politics. Everyone knows that tomorrow, the same riders might raid the next village, but tonight, their neighbors, bound by hunger and firelight. The wind shifts, carrying laughter, then singing. A nomad plucks at a two-stringed fiddle, its voice raw and haunting. A soldier joins in with a flute, the melody thin but steady. Together they weave a song that hovers in the air like smoke. You close your eyes, letting the music blur the boundaries, just as the horizon blurs sky and earth. Later, the mood hardens. A patrol rides in with news of skirmishes farther west. The laughter dies, bowls are set down half full, and the wall once again feels less like a gathering place and more like a scar. One old farmer mutters about how the land itself seems tired of being fought over, like soil worn thin by too many plows. You climb back onto the wall, looking out where the grasslands stretch forever. From up here, you see both sides. Villages huddled in valleys, smoke curling from chimneys, herds of horses grazing under nomad watch, their riders sharp silhouettes against the sun. You wonder how different they really are. Both raise families, both sing songs by firelight, both depend on the land, yet one calls the other barbarian, and the other returns the favor. A guard beside you cracks a dry joke. If only raiders could be bribed with porridge instead of princesses. You laugh, though the thought lingers longer than the humor. Diplomacy is costly, raiding is bloody, and the wall just keeps standing, pretending it can solve problems that have always been more human than stone. As the night deepens, The fires in the steppe flicker like rival beacons, answering the wall's own towers. You wrap your robe tighter, the wind biting harder now, and think about how this barrier doesn't just separate worlds. It forces them to stare at each other, forever circling, forever debating whether to fight or to share a meal. Asterisk, asterisk, the wind off the grasslands softens as you keep moving, and the horizon slowly fills with lantern light, the glow of markets, temples, and poetry recitals. You've drifted into the Tang Dynasty, where the empire stretches wide and proud, and the Great Wall no longer feels like a single, unbroken shield. Instead, it's part of a larger question. Defend with stone, or with words, silk, and diplomacy. You pass through a gate where merchants bustle in and out, their carts heavy with silk bolts, jade trinkets, and bundles of tea. The air smells of incense and horse dung, oddly complimentary in its own frontier way. A Temps official stands at the entrance, his robes spotless despite the dust, tallying goods with an abacus. He barely glances up as you shuffle past, too busy noting tax records. This, you realize, is a different kind of war bureaucracy. Tall and invisible. The soldiers here still drill, of course, their spears glinting in the sun, but their outposts are quieter, more ceremonial. You join them for a midday meal, dumplings stuffed with cabbage, a step up from millet, though a bit too chewy. Quirky tidbitang records mention officials sending wall duty poetry back to the capital, sometimes poking fun at the monotony. Imagine serving at the edge of the empire and mailing home a sonnet that basically says, "The wall's still here. I'm still bored." Mainstream fact: the Tang dynasty focused less on war building and more on diplomacy, forging tributary relations with neighboring states and managing trade routes. Still, frontier posts existed, a patchwork of fortifications rather than a single monumental chain. Historians still argue whether this approach showed pragmatic brilliance or dangerous neglect. From your perch on the wall, both feel true. The trade flows are rich, but the defenses look tired. You wander into a caravanserai, a rest stop buzzing with chatter in a dozen languages. The smell of spices, cinnamon, pepper, saffron swirls in the air, carried on the warm breath of camels. A Persian trader waves you over, offering a sip of sweet wine. His companion, a Buddhist monk, chuckles softly, muttering something about moderation. You drink anyway. The warmth spreads through your chest, cutting the chill of the evening. Night. Poets gather under lanterns hung from the wall. They recite verses that weave together moonlight, longing, and the endless line of stone stretching behind them. One young man sighs dramatically, declaring that his lover is as distant as the western watchtowers. Another smirks, replying that the only thing more endless than the wall is government paperwork. You laugh along, realizing that sarcasm has survived dynasties, just as stubbornly as the wall itself. The wall here feels less like a weapon and more like a backdrop, a stage for diplomacy and art. You lean on its edge, the stones cool beneath your palms, while music from flutes and lutes drifts upward like smoke. Yet unease lingers. Traders gossip about raids in distant provinces, soldiers mutter about stretched patrols, and the wind carries rumors faster than any smoke signal. You look out over the plains, watching torches flicker along the horizon. Maybe enemies, maybe just another caravan. Either way, the Temp's choice is clear. Build connections as much as barriers, whether that's wisdom or risk. No one can quite agree. As the moon rises, pale and round, you close your eyes. Somewhere behind you, a poet sighs again, swearing the moonlight makes him lonelier than any frontier watch. You almost laugh, but the night is soft, the wall steady, and for a moment, even uncertainty feels like part of the rhythm of history. The night fades into a grey dawn, and as you shuffle forward along the battered stones, the atmosphere changes. The calm murmur of poetry and trade caravans dissolves, replaced by the thunder of hooves. You've stepped into the age when Mongol winds tore across the land, and the Great Wall, such as it was, looked less like a fortress and more like a fence in the path of a storm. You hear it before you see it. The pounding rhythm of riders sweeping across the steppe, faster than your heart can keep up. The grass ripples in waves, and suddenly figures burst into view, arrows nocked, horses foaming at the mouth. The Mongols aren't here to politely knock on the empire's gate, they vault over walls, skid through mountain passes, and make defenses look like flimsy garden hedges. You duck instinctively, though nobody's aiming at you. Not yet. Mainstream fact. The Mongols under Genghis Khan, and later his successors, effectively overwhelmed most fixed defenses, including stretches of the wall. They didn't dismantle it so much as ignore it, riding around or through weak spots. To the nomadic mindset, the idea of caging the horizon with stone seemed laughably naive. Quirky tidbits. Some chronicles claim Mongol scouts mocked Chinese fortifications by racing each other over them, treating battlements like equestrian obstacles at a carnival. Whether true or not, you can imagine the humiliation. You creep into a deserted watchtower, its beacon cold, graffiti scratched into the stone by long-gone sentries. One carving reads like an early meme: a stick horse leaping over a stick wall, the rider holding what looks suspiciously like a wine jug. The joke practically writes itself. Historians still argue whether these humiliations reveal the wall's fundamental failure or simply the mismatch of error-slow agrarian defenses versus lightning-fast nomadic warfare. The wall in these parts feels broken, stitched together, its stones rattling like teeth in an old jaw. You can almost sense the panic of soldiers who once scrambled here, watching dust clouds form on the horizon, knowing the riders would arrive long before reinforcements. Some must have held on, firing arrows until quivers emptied, while others probably ran, hoping their absence would be lost in the chaos. You stop by a campfire, where stories still linger. The local peasants remember raids, livestock carried off, villages burned. Yet, curiously, some also remember trade Mongol horses swapped for Chinese grain, silk traded for steppe furs. The line between enemy and business partner blurs once again. You sip bitter tea boiled in smoke-blackened kettles, the taste sharp on your tongue. The farmers joke half-heartedly that the Mongols are just impatient customers skipping the checkout line. You laugh, but the sound feels thin against the emptiness of the plains. As the day lengthens, you walk beside a Mongol camp, hearing the constant whinny of horses and the chatter of foreign tongues. A boy no older than 12 sharpens an arrowhead, his hands practiced, his face calm. His mother stitches a saddle blanket with bright patterns, pausing only to glance at the horizon. Everyone seems prepared to move at a moment's notice, the opposite of your stubborn wall, which insists on staying rooted. You trudge on, and the wall dwindles in the distance, swallowed by grasses and dust. The Mongols ride freely, ignoring its crumbling lines, and you realize how powerless stone can seem against momentum. You feel a faint sympathy for the men who stacked those bricks centuries before, pouring sweat into something that storms could leap in a heartbeat. Night comes quickly, the wind sharper here. You wrap your cloak tighter, listening to horse bells jingle in the darkness. Somewhere out there, a rider whistles, and the sound pierces the air like an arrow. You sigh, knowing the wall is fading into memory here, a relic outpaced by hooves. Yet you also sense history whispering. Walls can crumble, but they will rise again, if only out of stubborn human need to keep building against the tide. Asterisk, asterisk, the dust of hooves slowly clears, and when you open your eyes again, the thunder has quieted. The land feels oddly hushed, as though it's been scooped clean of urgency. You've wandered into the Yuan dynasty, the era when Mongol rulers no longer rode as raiders, but sat as emperors, and suddenly the Great Wall seemed less like a lifeline and more like a neglected yard ornament. You shuffle past stretches of stone half swallowed by weeds. Here a tower leans, its top collapsed into a hollow shell where owls nest. There, an old beacon platform serves as nothing more than a goat pen. You lean on the cracked parapet, dust flaking beneath your hand, and you can almost hear it sigh. Remember when I mattered? Mainstream fact: under the Yuan dynasty, large-scale wall construction essentially halted. The Mongols had little use for barriers that once stood against their own armies. Instead, they emphasized mobility, cavalry patrols, and control of key routes. Quirky tidbit: some Yuan administrators even recycled old wallstones into city projects, giving fortifications an unglamorous afterlife as paving slabs and barn foundations. Imagine the indignity of a once proud battlement now, serving as someone's kitchen step. You make your way into a small town. The wall threads through the background like a forgotten ancestor, while the marketplace hums with a mix of Tungstikic, Persian, Chinese, even the clipped syllables of distant European traders. Silk still shines on stalls, spices still bite the air, and coins jingle in pouches, but the wall, it's just scenery, not strategy. A merchant slaps you on the back and quips that the empire itself is the only wall anyone needs now. You try to laugh, but your eyes keep drifting back to the neglected stones. In the corner of the square, an old soldier sits, half drunk on millet wine. Mumbling into his sleeve, he claims he once lit beacons along the frontier, warning of raids. Now, he says, nobody bothers, the empire rules both sides of the line. You catch a whiff of his drink and realize the man has been at it since morning. Still, his voice trembles with something more than alcohol. Maybe nostalgia, maybe fear that neglect has a cost. Historians still argue whether the Yuan's indifference to the wall was strategic, brilliance saving resources for cavalry, dominance, or dangerous arrogance that left future dynasties scrambling. You walk through the quiet remains, wondering the same thing. Each stone feels like a question mark pressed into the earth. As you move further along, the wall all but disappears, swallowed into fields and villages. Children play tag over broken bricks, shouting, laughing, tripping on history as though it were nothing more than playground rubble. A mother calls them in for dinner, balancing bowls of noodles, and the scent makes your stomach ache. You share a bowl, sitting cross-legged on a crumbling step. It's warm, comforting, ordinary, everything the wall no longer feels. Night drapes itself over the plains. The wall vanishes into shadows, but the stars blaze bright, endless. You wonder if the emperors cared, if they ever leaned on these stones to watch the same constellations, or maybe they dismissed the wall altogether, never sparing a glance. You sigh, realizing that, for all its grandeur, sometimes history's greatest works become invisible simply by being ignored. You curl up on the cold earth, the whisper of grass in your ears, the wall fading like an old story no one bothers to tell anymore. And yet, you know it won't stay forgotten forever. Stone is patient, empires are not. The chill of neglect lingers as you stir awake. But soon you hear the scrape of trowels, the clink of chisels, and the grunt of human effort. The Yuan dust clears, and you've shuffled into the Ming dynasty. where emperors look at the crumbling wall and decide, no more mud, no more half-measure. This time, it's bricks, stone, and mortar, something meant to last longer than emperors, or at least longer than the next Mongol raid. You stand before a construction site that feels more like a battlefield than a workshop. Men stagger under loads of granite, sweat streaking their backs even in the winter wind. Women haul baskets of lime mortar, their hands chapped and raw. Overseers bark orders, their bamboo rods tapping rhythmically against the stones. The air smells of dust, horse sweat, and boiling porridge. You step carefully between piles of rubble, your sandals crunching over shattered shards of rock. Mainstream fact: during the Ming Dynasty, massive rebuilding projects transformed the Great Wall from rammed earth mounds into the brick and stone structure most visible today. Defensive features, battlements, parapets, crenellations became standard, creating the iconic look. Quirky tidbits: workers used a sticky mortar, made in part from glutinous rice. Yes, you're walking on a 600-year-old recipe that doubles as both construction material and, arguably, an early take on rice-based superglue. You run your hand along a fresh wall section, the bricks sharp-edged, the mortar faintly sweet. The craftsmanship feels permanent, like it's daring time itself to try again. But permanence has a cost. Whispers swirl through the campfires at night. Thousands of laborers dying from exhaustion, disease, or simple accidents. You overhear a cruel joke muttered by one mason. When you die, they just use your body as more mortar. You laugh nervously, though it chills you, because the humor is closer to truth than comfort. Historians still argue whether Ming emperors built for real defense or for show, a statement of power as much as a military tool. Some say the sheer manpower and resources were overkill, while others argue it was the only reason Ming China resisted northern threats for as long as it did. From your vantage point, watching the wall stretch over impossible ridges, it looks both terrifyingly practical and breathtakingly theatrical. You climb a nearly finished tower, the view staggering. Below, workers swarm like ants, while the wall snakes into the horizon, hugging cliffs, diving into valleys, always climbing higher. A wind whips past your ears, carrying the clatter of chisels and the moans of laborers. You imagine what it must feel like to finish a section, step back, and realize you've built something so massive it almost dares the sky to interfere. At night, the workers gather around small fires, their bowls of thin rice gruel steaming in the cold. One young mason jokes that when the emperor next asks for his loyalty, he'll just point to the blisters on his palms. Another laughs, pretending to swear that he's personally built at least 3 great walls, given how many sections he's redone after supervisor corrections. You chuckle, the camaraderie somehow softening the edges of misery. The next day, you trail a convoy hauling stone blocks up a ridge so steep you feel your calves scream just watching. Men sing rhythm songs to keep step, their voices hoarse but defiant. Each heave feels like defiance to a refusal to let the wall crumble into obscurity again. You realize you're standing in the moment where the Great Wall takes on the iconic silhouette people picture centuries later. A dragon etched permanently into the spine of the land. By sunset, your legs are trembling, your ears ringing with hammer strikes, and yet you lean on the fresh battlements, marveling. The wall here doesn't just hold back enemies, it holds up the very idea of endurance. For all its cruelty, its cost, its ghosts, there's no denying its stubborn beauty. You exhale, the mortar beneath your fingers, gritty and strange, and whisper to yourself, this might actually last. Asterisk, asterisk, the stone feels cold under your palm as you continue. But it isn't the brisk wind alone that makes you shiver. It's the weight of all those invisible hands pressing against you, hands that hold bricks, mixed mortar, dragged carts, and sometimes never left this place. You've stepped deeper into the Ming era, into the chapter of the Great Wall where endurance wasn't just measured in stone, but in broken bodies. You trudge beside a line of laborers, their shoulders stooped under poles loaded with rock. Some cough into their sleeves, others mutter prayers to ancestors, and a few simply walk in silence, eyes glazed with exhaustion. You realize quickly that the wall isn't just built from bricks, it's also built from sweat, blood, and maybe even tears that dried into the mortar centuries ago. Mainstream fact: historians estimate hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, labored on the Ming Wall. Prisoners, peasants, soldiers, and conscripts alike were drafted into the effort. Quirky tidbit: there's a grim saying that the Great Wall is the longest cemetery on Earth, because so many died during its construction, and bodies were supposedly buried within the wall itself. Whether literally true or not, the phrase lingers in folklore like an unshakable ghost. At night, you sit by a campfire with a group of weary men. Their porridge is thin, more water than rice, and the only flavor comes from smoke and ash. One man cracks a joke, dark but funny in a way that only the desperate can manage. He says, "If I collapse tomorrow, at least I'll be part of history, probably the foundation stone no one bothers to notice." The others laugh, though their laughter is ragged, closer to sighs than joy. You laugh too, because sometimes that's the only thing you can do. Historians still argue whether these massive conscription campaigns strengthened the dynasty or quietly hollowed it out. Was the wall worth the price of rebellion, famine, and depopulated villages? Standing here, watching men collapse against the stones, you feel that debate in your chest. The wall is magnificent, yes, but magnificence always comes with a bill. You climb one of the taller watchtowers, the stairs uneven and sharp. From the top, you look down and see workers like ants, swarming along the spine of the hills. Some carry water, some push carts, and some simply lie down in the dirt, unwilling or unable to move. The sun burns overhead, and for a moment the wall doesn't look glorious at all. It looks like a scar carved into the earth, raw and angry. Still, even here, resilience finds cracks to grow through. A group of women sing as they work, their voices rising like a thread of light through the gloom. Their song is half lullaby, half mockery of the overseer's lyrics, about how the emperor builds walls, while the people build blisters. You smile, the tune looping in your head long after the singers vanish into the dust. By evening, when shadows stretch long across the ramparts, you sit alone, the silence broken only by the faint rustle of wind against stone. The wall stretches out before you, endless and unrelenting, and you can't shake the thought. Every brick you touch is held in place by someone's forgotten life. That realization isn't frightening, it's oddly grounding. The wall isn't just a monument of rulers, it's a chorus of ordinary voices that never got to tell their stories. You close your eyes and lean back against the stone, letting the weight of that chorus hum through you. Exhaustion is everywhere, yours, theirs, the world's. And yet the wall still stands, stubborn, defiant, unwilling to bow. Maybe that's what makes it great, in the truest sense. Not its size, not its strategy, but the fact that it embodies the resilience of countless people who kept lifting stones, even when every bone in their body begged them to stop. You stir awake to the sound of boots crunching gravel and the low murmur of foreign accents echoing against the stone. The air feels different, curious, probing. You're no longer among peasants and masons. Instead, You've stepped into the moment when outsiders first laid eyes on this dragon of stone and tried to decide if it was miracle or madness. A group of Jesuit missionaries huddle near a watchtower, their long robes dusty from the road. One points upward, squinting at the battlements, and mutters something that sounds like awe, mixed with skepticism. A Portuguese trader beside him gestures dramatically, as though the wall itself were a tale he'll sell twice over once he returns west. You trail behind them, catching snippets of debate. Is it the world's grandest feat of engineering, or just the grandest waste of effort? Mainstream fact. Jesuit missionaries like Matteo Ricci, along with traders and travelers, recorded impressions of the Great Wall when they entered China during the Ming period. To Europeans, the scale was astonishing, though not always understood. Quirky tidbit. Some early maps even exaggerated the wall into a colossal line spanning the entire continent, as if it were the Earth's spine itself. You chuckle imagining medieval Europeans convinced there was a single stone fence keeping Asia neatly tucked away. You watch as one envoy sets up an easel, sketching the wall's silhouette against the mountains. His pencil squeaks on parchment, tracing crenellations that zigzag like a dragon's spine. A soldier nearby leans over and scoffs. Draw it all. You'll die before your ink dries. The envoy laughs nervously, but keeps sketching anyway. Maybe the absurdity is the point. Historians still argue whether these foreign accounts shaped Europe's fascination with China as a land of marvels, or whether they simply confirmed suspicions that emperors everywhere liked to build oversized monuments. From your perspective, leaning on the parapet while Jesuits whisper prayers and traders tally potential profits, the answer feels like both. As dusk falls, lanterns flicker along the wall, their glow mirrored in the wide eyes of the visitors. One French priest runs his hands along the mortar, marveling at the rice-lime mixture, muttering that he's never seen stones held so firmly. He jokes that if Europeans had such glue, their churches might still be standing instead of constantly needing repairs. The soldiers chuckle, proud yet weary, as if the compliment belongs more to the laborers than the emperors. You share a flask of rice wine with a merchant from Samarkand, who insists the wall is less impressive than the markets in his homeland. He waves his hand dismissively, but you notice his eyes linger, drinking in the endless line of stone anyway. Bravado, you think, doesn't always match wonder. Later that night, you lie beneath the stars with the foreigners' chatter fading into the dark. They argue over measurements, compare it to Roman aqueducts, and mutter whether it could ever really stop an invasion. You let their voices blur into the wind. The wall has always been both shield and stage, fortress and theatre. Whether they see marvel or folly, it stands unmoved by their wonder. You close your eyes, the laughter and muttering fading. The wall stretches on, indifferent to praise, criticism, or bewilderment. It doesn't need validation. It simply endures, while the world around it keeps shifting, debating, and scribbling notes. Asterisk, asterisk, the dawn light filters across the mountains, pale gold, sliding over the ridges, like silk, and you find yourself walking along stones that feel quieter now, heavier somehow. The battlements are sturdy, but the clamor of frantic rebuilding and the fiery resolve of the Ming has softened into something more restrained. You've drifted into the Qing dynasty, where emperors Manchu rulers from beyond the wall stand, not in opposition to the steppe, but with their roots tangled in it. Suddenly, this endless barrier doesn't feel as urgent. It's still there, vast and stubborn, but its role has shifted. You brush your hand along the stones and sense the difference immediately. Fewer new repairs, less fresh mortar, more ivy clawing into cracks. Soldiers lounge in watchtowers, their armor more ceremonial than practical. When you greet them, one shrugs and mutters, "The wall's for tourists now." He laughs at his own joke, then explains that the emperor prefers diplomacy, alliances, and cavalry patrols instead of massive stone projects. You smirk, imagine telling Ming laborers that someday the wall would be described as decorative. Mainstream fact: the Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1912, shifted military priorities away from the Great Wall, focusing instead on treaties, garrisons, and direct control of frontier peoples. The Manchu rulers relied heavily on cavalry, making the wall less central to defense. Quirky tidbit: in some places, locals repurposed wall stones into farmhouses, pigpens, or even shrines, treating the ancient fortifications like a convenient quarry. You picture some poor ancestor explaining to his neighbor, "Yes, that's part of the Great Wall holding up my barn roof. Don't lean too hard on it." You walk beside a Qing patrol riding horses along the base of the wall. Their uniforms are neat, their banners fluttering in the wind, but their mood feels casual, as though they're showing presence more than enforcing fear. One soldier offers you a pouch of dried venison. It's tough, chewy, and tastes faintly of smoke. You gnaw on it anyway, grateful for the calories. The men talk not of looming invasions but of border negotiations, tea trade, and whether the emperor's edicts will finally fix their salaries. You grin, realizing some military complaints truly never change. Historians still argue whether this Qing reliance on diplomacy was wise foresight or complacency. On one hand, alliances and controlled trade reduced the need for endless walls. On the other, the lack of heavy fortification left gaps for rebellions and invasions later on. As you lean against the parapet, you feel that tension in the stone itself. Is it relief or slow decay? The wall continues. Of course it always does, but much of it feels like a backdrop now. Farmers plow right up against its base, planting wheat where soldiers once marched. Children play tag along the battlements, their shrieks bouncing off the stone. You laugh when one boy salutes you with a stick sword and declares himself general of the wall. His sister whacks him with a cabbage leaf and corrects him, "You're pig herder, not general." You can't help but snort into your sleeve. The sun climbs higher, and you wander into a small frontier village. A shrine sits at the edge of town, built partly from wall stones. The caretaker bows politely and explains that villagers believe the stones carry protective power, a leftover blessing from ancestors who died building them. He even shows you one rock etched with faint names, worn almost smooth by centuries of hands brushing over them. You press your palm against it, feeling a cool hum, whether from memory, faith, or just your own imagination. At night, you share hot tea with a group of scholars debating the wall's future. One argues that it remains vital, a symbol of China's strength. Another insists it's obsolete, a relic of stubborn emperors. A third chuckles, pointing out that whether useful or not, it's still too heavy to move, so it might as well stay. You sip your tea, letting their voices blur into the crackle of firewood. But later, when the debate fades into snores, you climb the battlements alone. The moonlight paints the stones silver, and the silence feels immense. You gaze northward, imagining Mongol riders galloping where now only wind sweeps the grass. You think of Ming laborers who broke their backs laying bricks, of Temp's poets who recited verses by lantern light, of Qin conscripts who dreamed of going home. The Qing may have shifted strategies, but the wall remembers all. You stretch out on the stone, the night air crisp, and wonder if the wall misses its urgency, if monuments can feel bored, abandoned, or relieved. You close your eyes, listening to the faint sound of crickets echoing in the cracks, and let the rhythm lull you. The wall, though quieter now, still hums with stories, waiting for someone to lean in and hear them. The morning creeps in soft and hazy, painting the wall in pale gold. But this time the stones feel heavier with imagination than with dust. You've walked past the centuries of frantic labor, shifting dynasties and military alarms. Now, the wall is no longer just a structure of defense. It's a symbol, one constantly retold, embroidered, and exaggerated until reality and myth blur together. Like ink bleeding into paper, you pass a group of scholars huddled under a tattered awning, their scrolls and brushes scattered across the table like a gambler's deck of cards. They aren't measuring battlements or calculating troop strengths. No, they're scribbling poetry about lovers torn apart by the endless dragon of stone, about generals whose loyalty is carved into mortar, about the wall itself as if it were alive, stretching and sighing in the moonlight. One scholar swears that the wall is so vast you can hear it breathing if you press your ear against the brick. You lean in and try it yourself mostly. You hear wind and the faint shuffle of your own impatience. But still, the image lingers, mainstream fact, by the late imperial period and into modernity. The Great Wall was romanticized in Chinese literature and later in global imagination, often described not as a practical defense, but as a timeless symbol of resilience and unity. Quirky tidbit: in some folk tales, the wall is said to have been built with human tears, or to echo with the wails of souls trapped within. In one famous legend, a woman named Meng Zhengnu wept so bitterly for her lost husband that part of the wall collapsed under the weight of her grief. You keep walking, and the myths pile higher than the stones themselves. Farmers passing by tell you that dragons guided the builders, curling their bodies along the hills so masons would know where to place the bricks. Others whisper that the wall is visible from the moon, a boast repeated so many times it's become half-truth in the public mind. Even though modern science chuckles at the claim, you imagine astronauts floating above Earth, squinting down, muttering, "Wait, is that a wall, or just smog?" Historians still argue whether these myths strengthen or weaken the wall's legacy. On one hand, exaggerations inspire awe and pride. On the other, they distract from the very real sweat, death, and grit of the builders. But as you stroll along, watching schoolchildren scribble dragons and phoenixes onto their paper kites before letting them fly over the battlements, you realize myth and truth aren't enemies here, they're partners, each brick carrying both story and stone. You settle for lunch beside a group of traveling actors rehearsing an opera. Their costumes shimmer with embroidered dragons and fierce generals. One performer, his face painted red, bellows lines about defending the empire with valor. Another, painted pale, sings mournfully about waiting for a lover who never returned from war duty. Between rehearsals, the actors laugh, sip tea, and tease one another about who sings the most off-key. You laugh along, realizing the wall isn't just stone, it's a stage that has hosted centuries of imagination. As evening comes, you lean against the parapet, looking out at ridges fading into shadows. The wall, in this light, really does resemble a dragon sprawled across mountains, its back rippling into the horizon. You remember the scholar's claim about breathing, and for just a heartbeat, you swear you feel it. The stones inhale the dusk, exhale the centuries, carrying every myth like a quiet heartbeat. Children light lanterns below, their small flames bobbing like stars at the wall's feet. Some float paper boats in a nearby stream, scrawled with wishes, for good harvests, for safe journeys, for love to return. You kneel, pick up a lantern, and whisper your own silent wish that the voices of the wall, the real and the imagined, will never fade. You fall asleep that night with a smile tugging your lips, knowing that sometimes the truth of history is less important than the way people choose to remember it. The wall may be brick and mortar, but it's also memory, longing, and the stubborn imagination of people who refuse to let stones remain silent. Asterisk, asterisk, the sky is washed in the palest shade of dawn, a soft grey pink that makes the wall's surface look less like stone and more like old parchment stretched across mountains. You blink slowly, realizing that after all this wandering through dynasties, myths, labor camps, and dreams, you're now standing at the edge of the present day. The Great Wall is no longer just a military project, nor a whispered legend. It's a global monument, buzzing with camera clicks, drone footage, and tourists in neon sneakers clutching iced coffees. You shuffle along the steps at Beidli, one of the most famous and most polished sections. Tour groups in matching hats march past you, flags bobbing overhead like parade banners. Guides speak into microphones, their voices echoing off the stone. This section was restored in the 1950s, one says, pointing to the gleaming parapets. Another explains proudly, Chairman Mao once declared that if you have not climbed the Great Wall, you are not a true hero. You overhear a teenager muttering that he'd rather be a non-hero with WI-Fi. Mainstream fact. The Great Wall today is a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most visited landmarks in the world. Millions trek across its restored stretches each year. Quirky tidbit. Some tourists actually haul wedding dresses or tuxedos up the steepest stairs, posing dramatically against the battlements, while drones buzz overhead to capture the perfect shot. Historians still argue whether heavy tourism saves the wall through attention and funding or damages it further through foot traffic, graffiti, and the sheer weight of so many selfie sticks. You lean against the railing, feeling the grooves under your palm, half restored, half ancient. The crowd buzzes around you, but if you half close your eyes, you still catch flashes of the past. Soldiers huddled against the cold, a farmer trudging with stones, a scholar reciting poetry. The centuries overlap like layers of transparent film, each face flickering briefly before vanishing back into time. Further along, the path grows emptier. You wander toward less restored stretches, where the wall crumbles quietly under weeds and wildflowers. A lizard suns itself on a collapsed parapet. A butterfly drifts lazily across a gap in the bricks. It's here that the wall feels truest, unpolished, breathing in rhythm with the mountains. You crouch, press your hand against the stone, and feel its rough warmth, as though the wall has been waiting patiently for someone to stop listening to microphones and tourist chatter. And finally hear its silent hum. The quiet makes your mind wander to the wall's fate. Conservationists struggle with how much to restore and how much to leave wild. Some argue for gleaming, walkable paths to attract visitors and money. Others whisper that the untouched ruin stones left to crumble into soil carry more dignity than polished reconstructions. Historians still argue whether a ruin is more authentic than a restoration, whether memory lives best in fragments or in renovations. You stand between the two truths, unable to decide, letting the paradox rest heavy in your chest. As the sun drops lower, you hike to a lonely watchtower. Its roof is broken, vines curling along its walls. Inside, etched graffiti from centuries past overlaps with modern scribbles. Some are names in neat calligraphy, others crude doodles of hearts and initials. You trace one with your fingertip, wondering if that long-dead traveler also paused, leaned against the stone, and felt the same pull of time stretching endlessly behind and ahead. Night comes again, the wall glowing faintly under moonlight. The tourists vanish, buses rolling away, and silence seeps back over the mountains. You sit on a fallen stone, legs tired, lungs full of cool night air. In the distance, fireworks bloom faintly from a city festival, sparks rising into the sky before dissolving into darkness. You imagine ancient beacons flaring in response. The wall alive again with urgent flames, but this time the signal is one of celebration, not war. Somewhere below, a dog barks. Somewhere farther, a train hums across steel rails. The wall hears it, all the clash of dynasties long gone, the laughter of children running across modern plazas, the click of keyboards as someone, maybe right now, Google's "Is the Great Wall visible from space?" The answer may not matter. What matters is that the question is still being asked. You close your eyes, lean your head against the cool stone, and whisper a small goodnight. For centuries, this wall has carried too much weight of armies, of myths, of arguments. Tonight, you let it rest. You let yourself rest with it. Asterisk, asterisk. Now the journey slows, the edges of memory softening like fabric worn smooth by time. The wall, once sharp and endless in your mind, blurs into a gentle ribbon across the mountains, less a fortress now and more a lullaby. You feel your breath lengthen, your shoulders sink, as though every stone you walked has been lifted from your back and set quietly down beside you. The echoes fade, the hammering of workers, the orders of generals, the laughter of poets and children. What remains is the hush of wind weaving through broken towers, a sound so steady it could almost be the ocean. You listen, and the rhythm rocks you, slow and tender, until it feels like the wall itself is exhaling around you. Whatever arguments scholars still have about authenticity, about myths, about the truth of who built and who commanded those voices soften to, distant and harmless. All that lingers is the certainty that human hands, for all their flaws and their brilliance, left something vast enough to carry us gently into sleep. You let your eyes drift shut, letting go of the need to climb further or question deeper. The wall stretches on without you, quiet, ancient, eternal, carrying the weight of centuries so you don't have to. And as the night folds around you, soft and complete, you sink into its stillness, knowing you are safe, knowing you are carried, knowing you can finally rest. Sweet dreams.